Recently, a YouTuber, Library of a Viking, produced a video with the title, Epic Fantasy is Dying and That Makes Me Sad. The subject of the video had to do with a number of things that have been reported on or mentioned recently that left an impression that epic fantasy craze might be tapering off. Library of the Viking cited the following reasons. 1. Several publishers dropping epic fantasy. 2. The stumbling of large epic fantasy adaptations, namely The Rings of Power and The Wheel of Time. The rise and proliferation of romantasy and cozy fantasy. 4. Publishing houses not being interested in long epic fantasy series. 5. Fewer epic fantasy books being published by debut authors. Now, I have a lot to say about this subject, so I think I may break this up into multiple videos. However, I think I'm going to start with the second and third items on that list of reasons, as it involves something else that I've been seeing since I started writing fantasy, and that is demographics and fandoms. The outright failures of adaptations like Rings of Power and The Wheel of Time aren't really heralding the decline of epic fantasy per se. It has more to do with the outright failure of the modern entertainment complex. And it's not just Rings of Power and Wheel of Time. It's Star Wars, the 216 Ghostbusters remake, the tailspin of Marvel and DC comic sales, Season 7 and 8 of A Game of Thrones, and all the reboots and reimaginings of movies that should have worked but didn't. The root cause of these failures? Flagrant incompetence and a scorching desire by some to pervert existing products in order to use them as vehicles for social agendas. But there's a new generation of fans out there, and they have different modern tastes, right? Well, if their modern tastes involve bad storytelling and subverting the long-established lore of something, then you might be right. But the fact is, the strategy isn't working. One only needs to see what happened to the showrunners of the Game of Thrones, the poor box office performance of various Marvel releases, and the declining fortunes of Disney to see how well that worked. The fact is, with the rise of bad fanfiction came the acceptance of some that you can just take an IP and twist it however you want. And because there was an ardent but small population of people that flocked to these bad fanfiction stories, it was assumed that this was the norm. Well, it wasn't. I also think people are tired of the predominant tropes being vomited out by some of these established companies, namely the girl boss tropes, love triangles, and so on. While that may work in some fandoms, it wasn't established in the rework stuff. So the changing stories and lore are a sure way to tick off fans and you send them going elsewhere for entertainment. They don't want you mucking around in what they believe is a good thing. And most importantly, it shows a supreme ignorance or hubris of the people who change these products. Because it's the fans that show up and buy tickets and wear the swag. It's the fans that spread the word. And if the word is, this sucks, that's going to get around quickly. And blaming the fans, that's the best way to see them never come back. This is something akin to what's going on with fantasy. It's not a coincidence that romantasy is now being called epic fantasy when it isn't. Fantasy has seen a demographic shift in recent years. Back in the 1940s, you had an audience that was 90% plus male and mostly young men. That has since gradually shifted since the 70s. Now it's something like 59%, and the average age of the male is in their 40s. Female readers, of course, have moved in to fill that gap, and with them came a potential shift in what people want out of fantasy. Some of the stuff including romance tropes. It's my belief, with the shift in literature being produced, male readers moved on. I know that this is one of the reasons why I got into writing fantasy, because I couldn't find the stuff I wanted to read. I was a fan of Robert E. Howard, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and the like. I tried reading Robin Hobb and a few others. They just did not speak to me. So instead of moving on, I decided to write my own stuff, and I know I'm not alone. I've heard other writers express the same sentiment. Likewise, I'm finding that my audience is primarily male. Women tend to be more gregarious readers. Men, however, don't have the same reading preference or habits. And there are studies out that back all this up. And I have long been told that men have been moving away from books, that they have other things where they can occupy their time. Of course, this is laughable, and I'm seeing the fallacy of this argument in my audiobook sales and direct sales at live events. And I also want to kind of point out that this shouldn't be indicative of the increase in the number of women writers in this genre. Women have long been a part of fantasy, and some, like Margaret Weis, have a very large male following. My belief is that this is the subject matter that's being introduced and how traditional publishers see the space, which is my next point. But traditional publishing doesn't look at the market in these terms, and this really isn't a male or female thing. This is about how business works these days. As short-sighted as it is, publishers are going to follow the money, and that money is in books like Fourth Wing and A Court of Thorns and Roses. Everything else is a vanity project. It is what it is. Now, it may sound like I'm painting a pretty grim picture, but the numbers over time don't lie. One cannot ignore the trends. Plus, I'd also like to point out this is only a partial reason why epic fantasy appears to be dying. Again, I dispute that the failure of adaptations like The Rings of Power heralds the death of epic fantasy. That has more to do with incompetence and the absolute hatred the industry has for fans of these properties, not the genre itself, and this is strictly my opinion. And I think, to an extent, the same applies to traditional publishing as well. Again, this is just one facet of many that I see with this issue. So that's this video. I'm going to be doing at least another one on this issue, and until then, I'll see you around.